Hello, everyone. Welcome to Now Next Later for Monday, March 10th. We're excited today. We are sponsored by Silk Title Company, which I'll talk more perhaps at the end, but you can find me on LinkedIn with Silk Title and what we're doing there. And our guest today is John Haring, an old friend. I think we can say that, John, now. We've known each other long enough. We've worked at a number of different stops in one way or another. We've done the panels. We've done the audience for each other's panels as well. So I feel like we can be the colleagues turned friends as so many people in this industry are.
I can definitely say you're one of my favorite people in the biz and have been for a while. And you're easy to spot at conferences because you just look out over the sea of heads of everybody. I kind of hide, at that lower 5'8" level, so easy to look over, but you I can pinpoint.
Well, it's nice of you to say, and I always appreciate when we get to see each other in person. And today we decided to do virtual instead.
Yep,
Neither
yep.
of us are at a conference today. So Sasha is at a conference today. So we're just going to have a conversation. I think it might be helpful too to start since it is Now Next Later. Where are you now? And tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now.
Oh, thanks for that. I'm at a great company, love. It's called Wilqo. We are kind of one of the newer entrants in the space from the origination technology point of view. But if you look at the people who are backing the company and who are in the company, these are veterans. Ty Jenkins, who is the founder of Docutech, Larry Huff and Dr. Yvonne um, Darius, who were the founders of Optimal Blue, and Jeff Benjamin, who I worked with when he headed sales at Ellie Mae. So,
Hmm.
these are some industry veterans that have built some of the most popular technology platforms out there, and we're all kind of together with the same mission, fix the mortgage process. Uh,
Well, it's one of the themes that comes up a lot on Now Next Later. I can
yes, it
assure you
does.
that is, one of the things that we identified over the last year doing this show was just the linear nature of underwriting from I'll even say pre-digital, honestly. It was, let's hand this file down the line as we get the paperwork in. It goes through a traditional linear process. A lot of companies are rethinking that, and so I'll just start there. When you talk about origination software and you talk about the origination process, like what's been your experience, and is that still true in how you look at it, how you're building what you're building at Wilco,
Absolutely.
or what changed?
Yeah, I'll mention, so at Wilco, we don't even call our solution an LOS or a POS. We call it
Okay.
a POP, which is short for Production Optimization Platform. And to your point, the whole concept is how do you take that linear progression, but actually break it down to what we call atomic level activities?
Mm-hmm.
And you start taking those atomic level activities and you start not only doing them in parallel processing, but you start peeling off the ones that people traditionally have done manually, and you introduce automation in those areas. Not only the simple things like triggering an order to happen, but what happens when that order comes back and who needs to be the person that's going to be able to pick it up and run with it. Um, to that end, a couple things we do very differently is we consider consumers part of the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Shocking thought. So
Mm-hmm.
they have their own place in the platform that's geared towards them and towards what's important to them. But they and the loan officer can be looking at the same loan application at the same time and helping
Mm-hmm.
each other out. And because we can have multiple users in the same loan at the same time, you can have three, four, five other people or processes running, doing a lot of that parallel activity, um, while multiple people are in that loan at the same time.
Now that's really interesting. So let's talk about that for a second, because when I think about, or at least when I should say this, when I talk to my clients in the startup space about the attributes of their software, about the attributes of things that have to be true, I just put in the chat for the audience, but dynamic and collaborative come up all the time because it's got to be dynamic and it's got to be collaborative. And kind of what you just reminded me of is, this kind of like older the box software where it's very rigid in terms of what this data field is, who can be in it, what this loan is, who can be in it. You have to see who's in it. You sometimes have to save it so that somebody else can work on it. I mean, that's pretty typical origination software. You're saying not only are we making it collaborative, dynamic, almost like I always think of kind of like Google Docs. I can see who's in the doc, right?
Yep,
Like you
yep,
send it to
yep.
somebody, you can see who's in it, and you can collaborate together. But then you're saying also adding the consumer into that group and having them participate is kind of a new wrinkle that I hadn't heard. So how do you manage? I'll say expectations, but I think we could also say rules and data integrity and compliance when everybody's working in at the same time.
And those are table stakes, right? I mean, compliance and quality, stability, security, those are all givens. Those are table stakes. They have to be there in any platform. Um, Part of the way that we break that up is not everybody needs to be in the entirety of the loan file at the same time. So when I
Mm-hmm.
talk about breaking those activities down into atomic level, we also have the concept of these advanced activities.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say as a junior underwriter or as a processor, when I come in the morning and I open Charlie, what we call our system,
Mm-hmm.
I don't just have a list of loans that I have no context about what's happening with them and what needs to be done in any of them. My main focus is actually this list of advanced activities that are what I'm expected to pick up and do today.
Mm-hmm.
And the system is also smart enough to realize that if we need to load balance, someone's got more activities than someone else does, but you have the same skill set, which is how we determine who gets sort of the ability to pick or assign to an activity. The system will, share it open and it's literally first come, first grab. Um, so you can actually stop this bottleneck of one person that has a lock on the entire loan because they're waiting for something to come in. And
Mm-hmm.
now I can have five other people or systems because we want to do a lot through automation,
Mm-hmm.
actually doing all those little activities behind the scenes without stepping on each other because my activity is well defined and is separate from your activity, and we're not even touching the same loan data.
Right. The same part of the loan, the same loan data, the same task list. I mean, you're reminding me a lot of, what I saw at Rocket Mortgage. I was there, Quicken Loans to Rocket Mortgage. And, a lot of people would always ask me, what's the secret sauce? And, culture comes up a lot at any place, people and that kind of thing. But I would always kind of go back to the workflow automation, giving the right work to the next person in the right time, and firing off those tasks that you're talking about based on the attributes of the loan. Meaning, what data is already there? What do we already know? What don't we know? And what makes the most sense to, order the next thing, whatever that is. And one of the things that you've hit on is sort of the bridge between now and next, in my opinion, which is a mindset shift. If you've been doing something way for a very long time and technology has supported you, tech vendors and the software that you've purchased or that you've gotten to know has supported you in doing that, how are you thinking about, how are you talking about helping especially lenders with that mindset shift?
It's a bit of a mind shift, and we have a big conversation with them about what they do and how they do it and why it's inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
So that when we're talking about an implementation, we say, okay, well, why don't we do it this way instead? For example, if you're going to have a lot of services that run automated that normally the processor would do,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to just let go of this knowledgeable person in your business. That is a key aspect of things. So, how do I keep them engaged with the things I still need them to do as a person, but
Mm-hmm.
expand that opportunity so maybe they have more engagement with the consumer? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even assigned to a consumer. So I have a fixed point of contact. Um, if you want, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
do it that way, it also lets us, I don't want to use the word democratize, but we start the ability of creating training roles for the staff we have that we want to bring up in the industry. So for example, with these concepts of skill sets, I can take a junior underwriter who's new to my company, instead of having them responsible for the ultimate decision on that loan and the weight of all of that, I can start them off with, I'm going to train you on credit review. So I'm
Hmm.
going to have you do credit review on 100 loans. You're going to have this guided activity that helps you make the right decisions and find the right things, that need to be called attention to. And at a certain point, when you've mastered credit, maybe now I'm going to start turning you loose to appraisal review, and I'm going to start
Hmm.
training you on that. So we don't have to have it all saddled on one person, which again creates sort of that bottleneck.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, we
it's a huge mentality shift, going back to your day, that you're not taking the folder and passing it from person to person and waiting days in between that being able to move on to the next person.
Yeah, I like bringing it up and I like the way you talked about it because one of the things that's difficult when we talk about innovation and product development in this industry, we tend to say a lot of really high level truths about adoption, about implementation. And really, where especially this audience, but also this industry is going, is like, let's dig down two or three levels below those truths about adoption and implementation and get to
Yep.
kind of what you're saying, which is look, humans are resistant to change, but when you give them a defined goal and you keep it really narrow, I'm going to teach you credit. And there's an expiration on that energy. In other words, you can only do that for so long before that person is going to either quit or you have to move them to the next thing. So, as you're thinking about a technology switch, you also have to be thinking about how am I going to use people in a way that is their highest and best use, but also know that I have to be honest about human nature. I'm going to have to move them more often now. They are going to have to understand more pieces now because if you leave someone on credit for 5 years, they will be miserable. So
Yep.
you have to bring in appraisal at some point. You have to bring in other pieces. And I think that sometimes can get lost in the larger truths about adoption and training.
Yep.
It's like, no, you got to be ready that you can still have a processor. We're not saying you won't, but let's think about how to make them more dynamic too. And
Yep.
maybe it does reduce your head count, and maybe it doesn't, but it's all about what you're trying to do. If you're trying to add a new product, well, after appraisal, maybe you put them on construction, or maybe you put them on an
That's right.
aspect of fix and flip or something like that. And so I think that's where, we get a lot of lender executives who watch the show and sort of like, all right, well, what can I do once I capture these savings? And I think what you're saying is like, well, once you've got people thinking this way, you can start putting them on different pieces and really starting to grow.
And and I'll tell you too, it's a paradigm shift too. That's very hard to do when you're on an existing platform that you've been using. And you know, my directive when I was at Ellie Mae is very different than what it is here at Wilqo. At Ellie
Mm-hmm.
Mae, it was do not disrupt. Too
Mm-hmm.
many people on the platform that are used to working in a certain way. The minute you do something a little different, you risk, huge blowback. So a lot of what we tried to do was, well, let's keep it as same as we can and try to make these incremental changes. That's good, but you're not going to get that. I'm going to completely change my process. I'm going to turn everything up on its head and rethink the way that I do loans today. With a new platform, a modern platform, it's the opposite. We want to disrupt.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be different. We want you to think about why you're doing it the way you're doing it and ask, is that really the best way? Or if you were doing this, today brand new, how would you do it?
So that's I'll take the bait on that because as far as I think about what's next, as we move kind of into the now, next, later, when I think about what's next, the biggest thing I've heard from my clients and from others in the industry over the last year or two is I want my LOS to be now they'll still use LOS by the way, so you
Yep, yep,
can
yep,
keep
yep.
that in mind. I
We're the
want my
only pop.
LOS.
It's okay.
I I want my LOS to be as small as possible. I don't want any salespeople in it. I don't want ideally anybody else in it if I could help it. I just need it for compliance, docs, fees, engine, calculators. That's it. And I'll put other stuff around it. And that's where I'll find my differentiator. What's your of where that fits in terms of dynamic collaborative and how a pop would respond to that?
So I don't want to fully challenge that principle because I think to certain points it's a good one. I would first ask my question when I say I'm going to be a differentiator,
Mm-hmm.
how? What exactly are you going to do that makes you a differentiator? Because just having different technology in of itself does not necessarily make you a differentiator, especially if you're going to the same vendors everyone else is going to. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you may be changing the shade of color you are, but you're still on the same color palette.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'd
What?
like to think that the other thing is that that is a response to these systems that are trying to be a one size fits all that says everybody's in the same platform, which is like a form generating engine. But now I try to want to find a space for you as a salesperson as to what makes sense to you. One of the things I think with more modern platforms is, and we talked about having the consumer as a party on the loan. You can actually still support these different entities that have different goals and different desires and different things they're trying to do in the system, get out of the system, without forcing them into seeing a lot of things that they don't need to see. You can
Mm-hmm.
create the right experience for the right person if that platform is robust enough to be able to support it. But you can still do things like that. Doesn't mean that we have to own the website, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We can be that widget that is the apply now. So you don't go into like our flow until you hit apply now. Everything else is still yours. So you
Mm-hmm.
want to do your branding, you want to, even your CRM connections, you
Mm-hmm.
want to tie into CRMs that you're comfortable with and you already have and use. There's no reason for the LOS to have to try to be that for you. So I think part of it too is defining what is my role in the space and be really good at that role that you're trying to do instead of trying to be the be all end all of everything. That's the
Yeah,
kind of
that's a
lot.
key. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about it as well because, there's a couple things you mentioned there that I want to dig into, but I'll start with that last one and work backwards. I mean, I had heard a mortgage advisor from stage at the economics summit in Dallas recently talking about like you don't want to play Rocket's game because it's hard to beat Rocket at their game. But if you don't serve up digital tools for people to connect digitally, you're probably stuck in a cost structure that makes it very difficult to ever lower costs. And so, how do you manage some of that? And so, I've been trying since then to think about these different tranches of identity, like these different types of identity in this industry. One for sure is speed the lead. How quickly do I get the person onto the phone with another person who takes the application? I think another one is, and we don't see this as much in the mortgage space, but in a lot of other consumer facing industries, we do get them back on the platform. That chat and phone calls and customer service is merely there as a encouragement
A
back to
funnel.
the platform, right? And then lastly is sort of the much more in market person to person referral, person to person application taking. There's some phone and text in there as you're going to see, but a lot of wholesale does business that way still. And you have these different things. I've been trying to, haven't quite gotten there, but what you're saying is like, look, you can't become platform driven overnight. You can't invite the consumer into something overnight. You've got to think about who you are today. And I think we definitely hit on that theme a lot, but I don't think it can be understated.
I absolutely agree. And that's why I kind of come back to when you say you want to be a differentiator, what are you going to do?
Got to pick.
Um, you talk about, not wanting to chase the rocket, which I get. Um, Without oversharing, I may have used a particular lender when I bought my house, several years ago. And there were things that I thought were pretty good that they had from a technology space. But when it came down to actually how I felt taken care of as a consumer, there's a lot of room of opportunity out there for people if you just focus on, treating that consumer like what if it was you going through the same transaction? Y- you know, um, I knew enough about the business to know that, hey, I'm supposed to close in 3 days and I still don't have a closing disclosure. So I'm on the phone going, where's my closing disclosure? Because I'm trying to push to that closing date. And, one of the things that was apparent to me was I cared more about closing on time than my lender did.
Hmm.
And that left a sour taste in my mouth that, you can't
Hmm.
get away from.
Yeah.
Um,
The two biggest things that I like to say all the time, and I like to make it more universal than mortgage, consumers want what they want when they want it, and they should. That's how we act when we're consumers. To your point, as you were buying a house, and that's how mortgage should operate. Our mindset should be, how can I live up to that expectation? That is not the mindset when I joined the industry, however many years ago. The mindset was like, we have the money and you're applying for it, so you'll do what we need you to do because we have the money and you're applying for it. And that's all fair based on how it was then, too. And so it has shifted. And with that shift comes like a longer tail of change. But consumers want what they want when they want it. And then it becomes, how do I get as close as I can to that, knowing I'll never be perfect? What are the tools in my toolkit and who do I give them to? And so I want to ask you about this inviting people into the transaction question, because obviously the consumer piece gets me fired up and I love thinking about that. But there's also all these other third party services. Like when I was at Rocket, Bob Walters, who was running Rocket Mortgage at the time, was like, look, if there's 100 things that have to happen on a loan, and I do 99 of them in 5 minutes, and one of them takes 10 days, the loan took 10 days to close. Nobody cares that it was 99% done in an hour. Everybody cares how long did it take to get the last piece that is the longest piece. And that longest piece has actually shifted a lot in the
yep.
last few years. How are you advising lenders? How do you think about it from your seat, and what is coming up next or even later as we think about that, with how long this transaction should take? How do you invite third parties in? How do you trigger these services to not take 10 days if we don't need them to? What do you see
Yeah.
out there?
It's interesting. So that was one of my frustrations, even as a consumer. So I'm, Johnny Good consumer. I get my list of conditions, things needed. I'm uploading it. I'm sending it the same day. And then I get a message that says, "Great, we got everything we need. Sit tight. We'll get back to you, when it's time to close." 15 days goes by where I don't hear a peep from my lender. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just assuming everything's hunky dory. If they need anything, they would have told me.
Right, sure. Why wouldn't you think that? Right.
Now I'm in that week leading up to closing, and I'm like 4 or 5 days before my scheduled closing date, and I'm picking up the phone going, "Hey, are we okay? Where are we? Are we going to be able to close on time? I haven't heard anything. Do you need anything?" And I get the worst thing that can possibly happen to a consumer at that stage, the last minute condition.
Mm-hmm.
The, "Hey, we sat on this loan for 15 days telling you we had everything we need. And now that we're approaching the most stressful time in the transaction, other than negotiating for the house itself, we're coming at you with the, oh, wait, we need this one more thing." Now, again, Johnny Good homeowner, I'm okay, here's that thing. I upload it the same day. I get something that says, "Great, we got it." Don't hear anything again.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're getting
It's like,
closer to 3 days to closing, and I'm like, "Hey, I need my closing disclosure. What's the
I
holdup?"
actually know this stuff. Yeah.
I actually kind of know, if I don't get this closing disclosure today, I'm not closing in 3 days. Um, so now I'm calling in and I'm getting different people and I'm having to tell the same story to each person that I talk to. And now it's the, "Well, we still have a problem with that one condition you had." And I'm like,
Mm.
"Well, talk to me. What do I need to do?" clarify for
What
me,
are my options? What can
yeah,
I?
what are
Yeah.
my options? How can I resolve this? And why are you doing this to me now at the last minute? That was the part that really bugged the heck out of me. And so again, have that same empathy for the consumer.
Listen,
So
real quick, it's the one thing they care about that we can't tell them. I'll be honest, like as far as like innovation questions go, it's my favorite one. The thing when we talk to consumers about what do they care about the most, consumer sentiment says the monthly payment. What's it going to be? I care about the monthly payment. That's the interest rate is a component of that, a big component. So they
yep,
care
yep,
about that, but they care about it as an ingredient of what am I going to pay every month?
that's right.
And we can't tell them street, we can't tell them until 3 days and in some case less than 3 days before closing. And it's unacceptable. It's just unacceptable. Like
Yeah,
we have to
yeah.
figure out a way to tell you what you're going to owe in a more confident and certain manner
How
to
much you're
be
bringing,
successful.
how much you're bringing to the closing table, and what your monthly payment's going to be, and what might cause it to change if it can change. I absolutely agree. That's the most, the critical aspects. And so to your point, my challenge going back to the lender, and I think this is part of the paradigm shift. We are used to looking at a closing date and working backwards and saying,
Mm-hmm.
now, okay, in order to make this date, this has to happen by here, this has to happen by here, this has to happen to here. I think an unintended consequence of that sometime is well, if this loan is 3 weeks from closing, I'm not going to spend any time on it because
Well,
I've
the
got
flags are
one,
going off on some other one. Yeah.
because I've got flags going off in another that's 2 weeks
Yeah.
from closing. You
Yes.
know, so if I wanted to recommend ways to differentiate to a lender, up your consumer game.
Yeah. Start
Be
triggering those activities earlier. Start
Can't over
launching those tasks.
communicate. Don't
Mm-hmm.
rely on email and text to be your single sources of communication. Have that conversation and pick it up. And if at all possible, don't wait to the last minute to stip for some kind of condition. That's why the underwriters, I think, need to be looking at the loan sooner,
Mm-hmm.
identifying those conditions so you're hitting it earlier in the process instead of waiting to the 11th hour and possibly blowing up the entire deal just because you didn't ask for that one thing you needed earlier
Yeah.
because
So
no one looked at it.
that's a perfect segue to kind of like a final question here about later. And when I say later in this context, you and I connected, especially on the compliance Dodd-Frank side of the world. And I think I'll put it as a hypothetical, but I don't know that it's actually a hypothetical anymore, which is if I start to move these tasks up funnel, I start to incorporate more of the automation and the consumer to get them done in a proactive way. And let's say I'm even able to then confirm the underwriting and the price and all that. Do you see, for lack of a better way to put this, do you see compliance becoming more about the forest than the trees? And what I mean is, Dodd Frank was very much about the trees, this form, this fee, this threshold, this thing. And we got really good at these minute little pieces that had to be exactly right because of what had happened and the evolution of that legislation. But now what I'm hearing from you is wait. Let's think about this bigger picture. If I'm giving them more certainty up front and I'm giving them the ability to control more of their own experience, like what could go wrong from a consumer disclosure perspective? They're seeing everything. What what am I hiding? I'm hiding nothing. I'm moving it all up front and
That's
I'm
right.
putting it there. Do you see compliance changing then as a result, or are we never really going to change that?
So I don't think compliance goes away, but I do think you can be smarter about compliance and it can be done better. And I'll use two examples for that. you know, One of the issues we used to see a lot of times in the Mavent world was customers charging fees that they weren't allowed to in the jurisdiction they were making loans.
Mm-hmm.
It should only take you running into that once to realize I can't charge this fee in this jurisdiction. So maybe it was hard to manage when you were letting users input fees, or you were using these templates that were for all states, because it's a
Mm-hmm.
massive undertaking to try to maintain that. Well, these days we've got fee engines.
Hmm.
One of the things Charlie has is we have an integrated partner with the surety, with Lodestar, where we actually have a fee engine, so you don't have to worry about disclosing fees you're not supposed to. The best way to avoid a compliance problem is to have never walked into it in the first place. So if I've
Right.
got a good product and pricing engine that makes sure I'm not going over thresholds, I've got a good fee engine making sure I'm not charging things I'm not supposed to, and making sure I'm disclosing things I'm supposed to. All those things reduce the friction of compliance. The last thing I was saying, one thing we're really passionate about in Charlie, is just having a report spit out that says you have a bunch of fails or warnings isn't enough because they get
Hmm.
ignored. We need to turn those into activities. The minute you've crossed points and fees, I should have an activity either going to the lock desk or to a branch manager saying, hey, I'm over fees by X amount. Can we make a concession? Can we make a credit somewhere? Am I off by thousands of dollars? I'm not going to bother the branch manager. I probably need to go back to the lock desk and say, what are my pricing options? Because I'm way over my threshold.
Listen, you're preaching the choir. I remember the scavenger hunt that was seeing a Maven fail, and then as a compliance officer, having to go into the loan with the Compass admin and be like, "Could it be this? Could it be this? Could it be this?" It literally felt like a scavenger hunt, honestly, at times. And so the fact that the systems are getting smart enough to identify what it is, highlight it, send you there, or send the right person there, I think that's a step forward just on that. just on
I
just on
appreciate
fee engines.
it. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm
So it's just it's that fresh take of how could I have done what I've always been doing, but do it better. And
Yeah.
don't be too worried about disrupting, because in this case, disruption is good.
Well, we couldn't agree more on Now Next Later. John, that's our time. I really appreciate you joining us. It was such a great conversation. I know as Wilqo continues to grow and as we run into these questions throughout this year and next year, as the regulatory environment changes and as the market shifts, we'll definitely have you back so we could talk more about this. But thank you, everyone, for listening. John, thank you for being here.
I would love it. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you, Silk Title, for the sponsorship. And everyone, join us next week. We will be talking ROI on how to actually lower fees with your tech implementation with Sasha, who will be back, and Christy. So thanks, John, and see everybody next week.